So we will be starting in probably 2 or 3 minutes here. If you just logged into the webinar, just wanted to let you know we are waiting for just a couple others to finish joining, and we're going to get started any minute. Well, thank you for joining us this morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Jordan Kraus, and I'm with IVO Networks. Today, here with me, we've got Eric Betterman and Peter Hammerlink, also with IVO, and Paul McKay from Bonds Pierce. And I just wanted to quickly mention that we're going to be talking about a few things, and we're going to go in a little technically on some of the points. So if you have any questions, there is a questions, a Q&A panel in your GoToMeeting that you can tag questions in there throughout, and then we'll make sure we have some time at the end to address those. So I think that's it, and I'm going to let Eric start us off.
All right. Good morning or good afternoon, as Jordan said. And again, we are going to be presenting to you a DirectAccess implementation overview with some focus on Bonds Pierce, one of our clients, and what they've done. Throughout this, as Jordan stated, please make sure you ask your questions in the questions panel. Some we may address as we go along, If we do not, we will address them at the end. So make sure you're constantly putting them in there as they arise. Moving on, we're going to take a look at what we're going to cover today. Today we're going to discuss some of the requirements and processes for a successful DirectAccess implementation. We also look at how Bond Pierce has successfully deployed DirectAccess with IVO networks. We're going to explain who we are and how we fit into this arena. Also, what is DirectAccess, what it means to you, what it can do, what's needed to bring it to reality. We're also going to look at the requirements and prerequisites to DirectAccess, as well as a brief example of the installation process. And then we're going to get into what we call use case scenarios. We have 2 scenarios that you may find interesting depending on your business model, as well as what Bond Pierce has done, and a brief discussion with them. We're also going to look at what the frequently asked questions are related to DirectAccess and this technology. Then, moving ahead, who is IVO Networks? IVO Networks, we're experts in Microsoft DirectAccess, Unified Access Gateway, otherwise known as UAG, and Threat Management Gateway, TMG. We're an OEM designer and manufacturer that distributes specialized hardened network edge appliances specifically for these Microsoft technologies. Not only do we provide a secure hardware solution, we also have a variety of software solutions as well as a full battery of professional services as it relates to these 3 Microsoft technologies. One thing that makes us unique when it comes to hardware and appliances is that all of our devices are hardened to be true edge devices. They can sit in the DMZ as well. We also use a mainboard Nitrox chipset that can give you up to 2.5 gigabytes of throughput on your encrypted data, which is important to those companies where performance is a major issue for them, for their remote workers and connectivity. Appliances also allow for both IPv4 and IPv6 resources to be accessed inside your network. We've also started enhancing the Microsoft stack as it relates to DirectAccess. A couple of these are our management console for DirectAccess, as well as what we call our NAT 4 to 6 translator that can be used to make sure if you have any client-side applications that do not understand IPv6, they will work via DirectAccess. All of our appliances also run UAG, so all of your non-Windows 7 users would be able to access their internal resources via a web portal. And next slide, please. I believe at this point we're probably going to kick it over to Jordan to start discussing DirectAccess. Again, if you want us to address any questions, make sure you put them in. Jordan is a forefront Microsoft MVP and be glad to address those questions. So with that, I'm going to get things started and hand it over to Jordan. Jordan?
Thanks, Eric. So, as you know, today we're here to talk about DirectAccess, and I find the easiest way to describe DirectAccess to those who haven't heard of it is automatic VPN, or sometimes we call it userless VPN, because basically DirectAccess is a remote access technology that when a user has a DirectAccess enabled laptop, they don't have to do anything. They're automatically connected to the corporate network wherever they are. Anytime they have internet access, they automatically have encrypted tunnels back to the corporate network. There's no VPN client software they have to launch or log into. There's no VPN client software, period, that the IT department has to install or update periodically or anything. And we're going to talk a lot more in detail about all the benefits that has. First point here, obviously this is a huge enabler for users. You don't have to train them on how to work differently from outside the office. They just turn on their computer and they open their applications. They open their email, their SharePoint, their file shares, all of their drive mappings. They just have access to everything from wherever they happen to be. It's also important to note DirectAccess is bidirectional. And so while it's great for the users, it's maybe even better from the IT perspective because you always have availability to get back to those computers, your corporate resources that are out traveling the world. So anytime those computers have internet access, you have a management tunnel that you can use to make sure that their group policies are always up to date, that their antivirus is up to date, that their patches are always current. You can even remotely access those machines. So it's a very powerful tool for both sides of the equation. And then one last point here, one of the real-world feedback we get from help desk after implementation, DirectAccess removes a lot of help desk calls from remote users. Anybody who administered a VPN solution before is familiar with connectivity problems and password problems and expiry changes, and probably the most simple one and easily recognizable as a big benefit is forgotten passwords. On a VPN laptop, if a user forgets their password and they're stuck at the login screen, there's not a whole lot you can do until they come into the office. And DirectAccess is able to establish itself based on internet connectivity even prior to user authentication. So literally, if I'm sitting at home with my laptop and it has internet access because it either remembers my wireless in my house, or maybe I just have the LAN cable plugged in, so Windows has internet access in the background, but I'm sitting at the login screen and I can't log in for whatever the reason. Maybe I just forgot my password. I can literally call the help desk. They can reset my password in Active Directory, and I can log in with my new password because I have that live constant connection. So again, just makes things really easy for the users, eliminates help desk calls for remote access space. Those are some of the overhead benefits of DirectAccess and what it is and what it can do. And it's important to note our last point here. There are kind of two flavors of DirectAccess. And I wanted to clarify this because if you've just gone out and read information about DirectAccess, it's easy to read information about one and assume that maybe its restrictions apply to the other. So we have what's called native DirectAccess, and that's a technology that's built into Server 2008 R2. And native DirectAccess isn't very realistic, mostly because it requires your internal network to be IPv6. And that right there is enough to steer companies off of it or scare people away from implementation. Almost all of my installs today are on IPv4 internal networks. That's still definitely the most common scenario that we see out there. And so all of our appliances, our DirectAccess concentrator appliances, we build on top of the UAG DirectAccess. UAG is a Microsoft forefront technology. We'll talk on the next slide a little bit about some of the other things UAG does, but for DirectAccess, UAG brings a whole bunch of benefits to the table. Things like high availability, load balancing. It's easier to implement, and primarily, probably the biggest benefit is that it has some translation technologies that mean your internal network doesn't have to know anything about IPv6, which is key to easy implementation for most companies. So I only bring that up to say that our appliances are focused on UAG DirectAccess, and that's what we're going to be talking about for the rest of the presentation today. The next slide here, we just talked about UAG and the things that it does to enhance DirectAccess, but UAG is also a web portal kind of a publishing solution, SSL VPN, if you will. So on our appliances, the DirectAccess concentrators, of course, you're going to use those to pump DirectAccess connections through. And DirectAccess is mostly for your corporate assets, your domain join laptops. We'll talk about the requirements of DirectAccess client computers in a minute, too. But DirectAccess is really for your domain joined Windows 7 laptops. That's the core user experience for DirectAccess. And so what about your XP laptops or your users with home computers or even cell phones and PDAs and tablets, or maybe you have a DirectAccess user who left their laptop at the office and now they're at home and they need access to their email or to something in SharePoint. Because we inbuild UAG with our appliances, we're able to publish web portal access as well that can be accessed from anywhere. So we can have an easy solution for users to hit a web portal page. They just punch in the URL, they authenticate to it, and then they have their list of applications that they have access to on a one-by-one basis. So maybe you put Outlook Web Access in there, maybe you put SharePoint in there, maybe you have a connection in there which allows them to RDP into a computer inside the network. Those are all common scenarios. And then the UAG portals also include a full-blown SSL VPN tunneling capability too. So maybe your IT staff, instead of choosing their one-by-one application access, maybe it makes more sense for them to just launch a full VPN connection from inside the UAG portal. And that's also a feature, a possibility with UAG. So both technologies are included on every appliance, DirectAccess and UAG, and you can make use of both of them simultaneously. All right, now we're going to focus on DirectAccess, and this is where we're going to start to really get into the requirements for it, the prerequisites. These are all the areas that if you just start reading about DirectAccess on TechNet, it's easy to get lost in all the details, especially certificates. So I'm going to focus on that as well, because it's really not as difficult as a lot of people make it out to be. So first requirement here is that you've got to be an Active Directory shop. If you're not running Active Directory, you're not going to be able to utilize DirectAccess. You could probably still utilize UAG if you had interest in reverse proxying some applications. But with DirectAccess, you've got to be Active Directory primarily because the systems involved have to be domain joined. So that's the next point here. The DirectAccess client computers, which are typically laptops, but they don't have to be. They could be desktops, tablets, anything running these operating systems. Do have to be joined to the domain. And the operating systems supported are Windows 7 Enterprise and Ultimate. Those are the most common. And then you can also make a Server 2008 R2 box via DirectAccess client. And in the use cases, we're going to talk a little bit more about why that might be interesting. IP address requirements, pretty simple. We just need an internal address. The appliance is really going to have two legs. It's pretty straightforward. We'll have an internal leg and an external leg, or NIC. On the internal side, we just need connectivity. So it can be an IPv4 address. It can be v6 if you have v6 inside your network, or it can be a mix of both if we're talking to two different platforms. And then on the public side, on the external interface, you need to have two actual public IPv4 addresses on the NIC. And so what this means is that, like Eric was saying, these are designed to be true edge devices, and so about 50% of our installs do go directly on the edge with the security appliance being installed where it's plugged right into the internet, and it's completely safe to do that. That then obviously makes it very easy to just throw public IP addresses on there. But a lot of companies have DMZs and sit everything behind a firewall. And even though the appliance is its own firewall, so you'll see a note about TMG here in a minute, we are running TMG, which is Microsoft's firewall platform, on every appliance that is designed to protect it from the outside. And so though it is entirely safe to plug these things straight into the internet, sometimes you have a DMZ and maybe you have a written security policy that says anything going to the internet has to be in this DMZ. And it can work with that too. But because of the requirement that the NIC actually needs to have public IP addresses, what that means is that your firewall has to be able to route the IPs straight through, essentially. So you can sit behind a firewall, and if you sit behind a firewall, we'll talk in just a second about what needs to be open. But that firewall has to be capable of doing an IP route and sending the actual public IPs through it to the appliance. Some firewalls can do that, some can't. And so if your firewall is one that cannot do that and can only NAT, that will not work with DirectAccess. It does not work sitting behind a NAT. So all that to say, no NAT. Firewall requirements, if you are going behind one. The external firewall, a firewall which sits between the internet and the external NIC of the appliance, we just need to open three things that are listed out here: TCP 443, UDP 3544, and IP protocol 41. And then you also have the option of putting a firewall on the inside part of the connection, so between the internal NIC of the appliance and your corporate network. This isn't a very common installation scenario, and if you do choose to do that, it's Microsoft's recommendation basically to allow everything. And the reason they make that recommendation is because everybody's environment is different, and everybody's client computers are going to be doing different things and talking to different resources and using different ports. And so it's not possible to create a list of these are the things you have to have open. And so really that's the reason that they recommend open everything. And so what I have had some companies do is start this way. If you want to have a firewall there, open everything, and then once we confirm DirectAccess is working, we can go ahead and start buttoning down that firewall, crack it down until the point that something breaks, really, and then we know that that's our stopping point. I would say more commonly than putting a firewall there is to put some kind of an IDS or IPS that's monitoring the traffic. That seems to make a lot more sense to most installs. All right, another prerequisite, something we're going to do, is create an Active Directory security group. And this is just a regular global security group or universal security group, whatever makes the most sense to you. And this group is simply going to be used to contain the DirectAccess client computers. This group is going to be how we define what computers or what laptops are my DirectAccess client computers. And this is actually a really neat thing because the way that DirectAccess connectivity settings are assigned is group policy. So we're going to talk about the actual installation process, but basically the very last thing that you do on the appliance, kind of the go button, so to speak, the appliance will go out into Active Directory, and it's going to create a couple of GPOs for you. And it's going to take care of creating and populating and security filtering those GPOs. But what those GPOs do is contain all of the settings that DirectAccess client computers need to be able to connect via DirectAccess. So when you have a new computer given to a user, and you want that computer to be a DirectAccess machine, IT doesn't have to touch that machine. As long as it's joined to a domain, you simply add that account into this group that we're going to create, and the next time that they get a group policy refresh, they're automatically ready for DirectAccess connectivity. So that's the real purpose of this group, is just for the security filtering of the GPO. Alternatively, you can specify an OU instead of a group, but I always recommend going with a group simply because it's a lot easier to add and remove computers from a group without changing anything else about those computers. If you take the OU approach, then if you want to add a machine or take away a machine, it involves actually moving the computer account, which could do a lot of things to that computer. So you can do either, but a group is much easier, much more straightforward. And just an important note here, do not include computers in this group that you don't intend to be DirectAccess clients. You definitely don't want to add domain computers into this group. Basically, you don't want your internal servers to be trying to connect over DirectAccess. That's going to cause you some problems. So just a side note there. One of the other prerequisites that we're going to be doing in the environment, this is another thing that is external of the appliance itself. We're going to be setting up an NLS. Microsoft calls this a network location server. I really don't like that they call it a server because it does not have to be a dedicated machine. Really all we're going to be doing is setting up a simple website that runs inside your network somewhere. And the DirectAccess client computers simply query this website to find out whether they can see it or not. And if they can see it, great. They assume they're inside the network, and they're going to start taking the steps to shut off the DirectAccess tunneling protocols. And if they don't see the NLS website, then they assume they're outside the network, and they're going to take steps to turn on DirectAccess automatically. So this website is a very simple requirement. but it's a very important piece of the puzzle. And so it is recommended that this be highly available. And the only caveat with this, just so that it can't be spoofed or that you can't get into some kind of a man-in-the-middle situation with this site, is that it is required that this be an HTTPS site. But the nice thing about it is that it's a website that only your corporate domain joined machines are ever going to be contacting. And so since your domain joined machines already trust any of your CA servers as root authorities, you can issue an SSL certificate to it from your internal CA server. You don't have to go buy a certificate for this guy. And so you can at least get away with not having to pay for this certificate. A couple of DNS requirements, really simple. First one is for the NLS website that we just talked about. Obviously, you're going to run this website, and so you're going to create a DNS record for this website. Many times it's nls.company.local, whatever your internal suffix is. And then that record just resolves to the IP address of wherever that site is running. And then we're going to have a public host record that we need to create as well. And this is for what is called IP over HTTPS. I won't go too far into the details on the connection here for time's sake, but when a DirectAccess client computer goes ahead and connects to its DirectAccess concentrator appliance, it automatically chooses, based on whatever kind of a network I'm on as a user, my computer is going to go ahead and choose one of 3 different protocols for connecting me to the network. Just to throw some names out, those 3 protocols are called 6-4. The second one is called Teredo, which many folks have heard of. And the third one is called IP over HTTPS. And IP HTTPS is essentially a way of taking DirectAccess packets and making them HTTPS traffic so that they can flow through restrictive firewalls. Maybe you're at a hotel that only allows ports 80 and 443 for internet access. DirectAccess can still work in that situation by wrapping the packets up inside IP HTTPS headers. And so because IP HTTPS is essentially SSL traffic, it requires an SSL listener on the box. And I'm starting to get ahead of myself a little here, but I'll just go with it. So we do need an SSL certificate on there as well. This certificate is actually going to go on the appliance itself, on your DirectAccess box, because it's the one receiving and authenticating that traffic. And so DNS requirements are simply that we need to choose a DNS record. A lot of times it's da.company.com. This is going to be whatever your public DNS suffix is. It's an address that the users never see, so it really doesn't matter what it is, but your computer is just going to be using it in the background to make that connection. And that DNS record, whatever you choose, is going to be pointed at the primary public IP address of the DirectAccess box. So to continue what we were talking about with certificates there, and really this is where we get into the heart of probably the most confusion about DirectAccess is the PKI, the certificate infrastructure. How much time am I going to have to spend on this? Not very much. We have there really are 3 places where certificates are used, and 2 of those are SSL certificates, which are pretty common knowledge for most IT shops. One we talked about already. We have an SSL certificate that's going to be going on the NLS website, wherever you've got that running, whatever IAS server maybe you've got it running on. It needs to have an SSL certificate, and like we talked about, that cert can be issued from your internal CA, or you can purchase one if that's your choice. So simple SSL there. We need another SSL certificate, the one that we just talked about, for the IP over HTTPS listener. This is a cert that gets installed onto the DirectAccess box itself because it's the one authenticating that traffic from the client computers. And this one needs to have a subject name that matches whatever the DNS record is that you chose for that public, or it can be a wildcard certificate. If you've got one already, then you're covered. And this certificate I do definitely recommend it being one that you purchase from your regular public CA, any of which can be used, VeriSign, Entrust, GoDaddy, whoever you're familiar with. I definitely recommend, though, because this certificate is public-facing, it's going to be much easier to simply drop a certificate on your box than to have to worry about externally publishing your internal CA infrastructure. If you decide to use your own internal certificate for this, you technically can, but it involves publishing some things and especially certificate revocation lists. It can get complicated, and that's a part that people very commonly struggle with. So if you go ahead and spend the money on this one and purchase a certificate, it's going to save you a lot of time and a lot of headache. And then the third place that certificates are used are the actual machine certificates. One thing we didn't talk about yet, I guess in detail, is that direct access traffic is all IPsec traffic. And so to be able to authenticate and encrypt the IPsec tunnels, we need to have machine certificates on both sides of the connection. So the only real requirement for these certificates is that you simply have to have a CA server running in your environment. Most companies that I talk to have one already, and so if you do, your requirement is met. It's just a matter of issuing the certificates from it. I have worked with a few companies now that did not have a CA server, maybe didn't even know what a CA server was, and I've been able to walk them through setting one up. It's just a role in Windows Server that you install, and we've been able to walk through setting one up in 10 or 15 minutes. And the nice thing about direct access and these certificates is that the inbuilt defaults are exactly what's needed to make direct access work. So even if you have to set up a CA server, stand up a server, and install the CA role, by simply walking through all of the default settings, you're going to be in good shape for making direct access work already. So these are going to be machine certificates, and they're going to be issued to a number of computers. First of all, the certificates are going to get issued to your direct access concentrator appliance, or if you're running an array, maybe you have 2, maybe you have 5 or more appliances that are doing load balancing and give you some redundancy, then each of those appliances is going to need a machine certificate issued to it from your CA server. And then each of the direct access client computers will also need a machine certificate issued to it from your CA server. And the issuance of certificates is very easy to do. You can do it manually, though then that does require touching those computers. Or what most installs do is flip a switch in Active Directory called auto-enrollment. And once you turn on auto-enrollment, Active Directory tells your CA server to go ahead and just issue certificates to all of your domain joined machines, which covers all of the computers necessary for direct access. So that's a very easy way to automatically administer this. That does mean that you're going to get certificates assigned to maybe some internal computers or servers that don't need them because they're not direct access, but to have a certificate sitting in the store doesn't do anything negative, and really it enables you to maybe do more things with that certificate in the future. So that really is all that it takes for certificates. We have 2 SSL certs, and then we have the machine certs, which you're going to have numerous machine certs in your environment, but they're extremely easy to issue and to administer. One thing we didn't talk about, and maybe those of you who haven't worked in CA server, this may be a little too much information, but I'll be quick about it. When you issue a certificate from inside CA server, you pick what template you want to use. So when you install the CA server role, it installs with a bunch of predefined templates, and those templates are different settings. And so when you issue a certificate based on a particular template, the certificate that you get will have the settings that were in that template. One of the inbuilt templates in Windows Server is called the computer template. When you install the CA server role, it automatically puts in the computer template and enables it. The computer template does exactly what we need it to do for direct access. So I always recommend, especially if you're not overly familiar with certificates, to just use the inbuilt computer template. It does exactly what we need. But a lot of times we go in and companies do have some familiarity with certificates, and so maybe you already have certs issued for a different purpose, or just for whatever the reason, maybe you want to use or build a custom template for DirectAccess, and then maybe call it something about DirectAccess so that you can identify it easier. If you do want to define your own template, there are basically 3 things that you need to make sure you do in that template to make it successful for DirectAccess. Again, the computer template does all of these things. So if you choose computer template, you don't need this information at all. But if you set up your own custom template, it must serve the purposes of both client and server authentication. The subject name of the certificate must match the common name of the machine, which is the FQDN. And the SAN name of the certificate must also match the FQDN. And we do that by checking off the box for DNS name in the certificate template. So those are the requirements for using a custom template for the machine certificate in DirectAccess. And now the actual installation process. This is a nice, short little slide because the bulk of the work with DirectAccess is getting all of the prerequisites lined up, basically. But this slide is really all-inclusive. So first we've got a number of things that we're going to do outside of the DirectAccess concentrator box itself. And those things are all things we've already talked about today. So we're creating the Active Directory security group, which is going to be used to hold the DA computer accounts. We're going to configure the DNS records that we talked about, internally for NLS, externally for IP over HTTPS. We're going to stand up that NLS website. And we talked about everything that's involved there, just a simple internal website running HTTPS. And then we're going to issue the machine certificates to the DirectAccess computers from your internal CA server. So that takes care of all the things we have to do beside the appliance itself. And then on the concentrator appliance, we are obviously going to be configuring some IP addresses. We'll give it a host name. We're going to join it to the domain like we talked about. We're going to get an SSL certificate for IP over HTTPS, and it's also going to get a machine certificate from your internal CA server. We discussed that as well. And then once we have all those things in place, we simply run through the DirectAccess configuration wizards. It's all done in a GUI. It's all done via easy-to-use, self-explanatory wizards. For the sake of time on the webinar today, we're not going to launch through all of the wizards, but essentially it's a series of 3 little mini wizards that each one asks maybe 4 questions. And they're all common sense questions. Really, you're just kind of filling in the blanks for all the things we've talked about already today. So the wizards are going to ask you, what IP addresses are you using? What DNS names are you using? What certificates are you using? What certificate in my certificate store should I use for IP HTTPS? And then which certificate should I use for the machine cert? It's all questions that are explained in the wizards, all very easy to run through. And then once we hit the end of the wizard and we hit the finish button, like I mentioned once earlier, there's just kind of a final go button. And what that button does is then it takes the answers to all of your questions and it creates a big PowerShell script. And then the appliance will go out completely automatically. It will go out and it will create 2 GPOs in your Active Directory, and it'll populate those GPOs with settings. One of the GPOs is all of the server-side settings, and so that GPO is going to get populated with all of the listener settings, and that GPO is automatically going to get security filtered so that it only applies back to the DirectAccess appliances. And the reason it's done via GPO instead of just configuring itself is so that if you do have an array of appliances, that GPO will then get automatically filtered to your whole array, and you don't have to go run the wizard 5 times. And then the second GPO is the client's GPO that we mentioned. It's going to contain all of the client connectivity settings that the laptops need. And then the security filtering is also going to be automatically set on that GPO so that it only gets applied to the DirectAccess client machines. And that's all it takes. You've got live DirectAccess. All you have to do is add computer accounts into that group, and then the next time they get their group policy refresh, they'll be ready to unplug and go plug in at the user's house and be automatically connected. So now I've just got 2 slides here. Now that we know what DirectAccess is, we've been through the technical details of installing it. We felt that was important to make sure you knew that it's really not overly complicated. I work with people on the forums a lot that have been struggling with DirectAccess for days, maybe tinkering around with it for a long time. Our typical implementation time is somewhere between 3 and 5 hours to go from nothing to live DirectAccess. So it really is not difficult, and we wanted to make sure you knew what it took and what all the requirements were so that we could be realistic about it. But a couple of fun use case scenarios that we're starting to see more and more of. The first one is called our branch office scenario. And these use case scenarios are just ways to get you thinking creatively of different ways that DirectAccess could be beneficial to you. So our branch office scenario, we recognize that many companies have branch offices scattered all over the country, sometimes all over the world. And most of the time today, those branch offices all connect back to a main data center, a main headquarters somewhere. And usually that connection back is either some kind of a frame relay circuit, like an MPLS circuit that's doing that job. Anybody that's worked with MPLS lines know that they are traditionally slow and they cost a lot of money. And the other way that we commonly see is some kind of a site-to-site VPN, which then allows you to use more of a regular internet connection, but site-to-site VPNs can be problematic, to say the least. So what we have seen more in the field now is that companies with DirectAccess are starting to be able to ditch those old ways of doing things, of doing the branch office scenario. And what this slide really shows, all of the internet connections here are just fictitious. They can be, our real point is that DirectAccess works over any kind of internet connection. So maybe a company has a traveling laptop user, and so they connect obviously from wherever they are. That was the core principle of DirectAccess in the first place, is anywhere access, anytime, wherever you are. But then maybe you also have a branch office that has a handful of computers. Right now they connect back through whatever method you have. If it's MPLS, it probably costs you a lot of money. And what companies are able to do now is ditch that MPLS line, put in a regular internet connection, maybe a business class DSL or something, which costs a whole lot less and usually gives a whole lot more bandwidth. And then as long as all of the computers in that office, you set them up to be DirectAccess connected computers, all of those computers establish encrypted tunnels over the regular internet connection 24/7/365. And so you always have continuous access to those guys. They always have continuous access in, just like you did before, except that it's better performance for them and it's a cost savings for you. And then maybe in a bigger branch office, the one we've got on the bottom here, maybe you've got more computers. And maybe you have enough computers or users in that branch office that it warrants them to have their own file server. That was a question we bumped into. Does that then still work with DirectAccess, or does that mean my bigger branch office still has to have some other kind of connectivity? And that's why I mentioned earlier the tie-in with a Server 2008 R2 box being able to be a DirectAccess client computer, is that if you have the branch office scenario, as long as all your client computers are Windows 7, they can, of course, connect back via DirectAccess all the time. But if they have a local file server, as long as that file server is Server 2008 R2, or maybe it's a read-only domain controller, doesn't have to be a file server, but those local servers, if they're Server 2008 R2, can also be DirectAccess client computers, just like the clients can. So you simply add the computer account into the group, just like you do for the DirectAccess laptops, and they are configured to be DirectAccess client computers as well that are continuously connected to the corporate data center over DirectAccess tunnels. So it's a very interesting use case, and actually a previous employer of mine, title insurance agency, that we had agents just all over the place, sometimes in their own offices, sometimes in customers' offices, sometimes in realtors' offices, in banks. This would have been the idea of the decade, DirectAccess, to enable connectivity from wherever they were, and not to have the whole stack of routing equipment in every little one-person office with expensive frame relay circuits, fractional T1s in every office. We think this is going to be a big enabler for companies with branch offices. And then the other use case we want to look at here was a fun install, probably one of my most fun that I got to work with. We installed DirectAccess on one of our concentrator appliances for a city government over here in the U.S. And initially we were installing just for their traveling employees, so that the city employees could have access from wherever they were, if they were at home, if they were in different buildings around the city, wherever they were, they just had access to make it easy for them not to have to VPN anymore. So that obviously covered employees at home, employees traveling. Eventually they started to add some computer access in another main building that the city owned, a police department. So they had some people that regularly had to connect back to the main city building where the DirectAccess box was to be able to get information. And so that made sense also to use DirectAccess computers to give them a connection back all the time. And then I found out that they were replacing computers in their squad cars, in their police cars. They had a project anyway. They were going to Windows 7 in those squad cars. And their current solution was that they had a stack of expensive Cisco equipment in the trunk of every squad car. It was literally thousands of dollars they put into every squad car so that those cars could connect over some kind of WiMAX or wireless to antennas that were strategically placed all around the city. It was expensive. There were dead spots. If it disconnected for some reason, the officers had to relaunch their connectivity, their VPN, then they had to relaunch their apps. All typical VPN problems, except they're having to do it from in the car. And then we started talking about DirectAccess, and then we discovered, because we still had the question of how to have the internet connection in the first place, basically for this city, we discovered that Sprint doesn't have to be Sprint. Any of the cell carriers obviously have solutions for this, but in this case, Sprint had already provided cellular data service in all the cars already. They had it. They always had it. They just never made use of it. And so this is a fun case because with the implementation of the Windows 7 computers in the cars, we were able to get rid of all that kind of crazy infrastructure, and now the squad cars just make use of the Sprint internet connection that's always there, always connected anyway. The computers that are in the squad cars are Windows 7 computers, and they're just continuously connected via DirectAccess wherever they are. And cell towers too, there are dead spots sometimes, and the big key here is that with DirectAccess, it's automatically establishing, and therefore it's automatically reconnecting to any time that it can. And so if they do hit a dead spot, it just reconnects as soon as it has service again. This also enables them to leave the city if they need to and not drop their connectivity. So another interesting situation that we ran into. I'm going to turn it back over to Eric now. Thank you for listening to the technical details. And like Eric said, make sure to put any questions in there that you might have, and we'll make sure we have time at the end for that.
Thank you, Jordan. And I am going to be handing this part of the presentation over to Peter and his counterpart at Bond Pierce to discuss some of what they've been doing. So with that, Peter.
Excellent, appreciate it. Introduce to you our client, our customer, Paul McKay of Bond Pierce, and we call him Mac, if so we'll stay informal here. Uh, that's all right. That's what we try to. Mac, if you could, really just kind of touch on maybe some of the problems or issues that once you've got this our appliance installed that you've been able to solve.
Yeah, sure. As Jordan and Peter and Eric have already said, the DA kind of scenario is aided ourselves. It's allowed us to get rid of our VPN gateways, which anybody who's using a VPN gateway knows that the user experience of doing so can at times be very clunky. It can cause a lot of time in order to log in and get established a connection, especially if you're then running any subsequent scripts once the client has logged in, etc. So with the direct access deployment that we've actually done with the concentrator and with the help of IVO, we've been able to get all of our clients with laptops who are regularly out of the office, whether it be at home or at client site, able to literally log into the Windows laptop as they normally would, and they're connected to the network. And it really is that easy and simple. And some of our biggest users and some of the people who make the biggest noise, they've all been very appreciative and have actually said how much of a difference it has made to them. You can see there towards the bottom of that slide, it's saving on average 5 to 7 minutes every time they log into their laptop whenever they're away from the office. So as you can imagine, as a law firm billing in units, 6-minute units, 5 to 7 minutes is a unit of time a day. Doesn't sound a lot, but when you average that across 200, 250 lawyers who are all laptop users using direct access over the course of a year, that it's quite an exponential saving and time that those fee earners can be billing clients, etc.
Excellent. If you kind of go back to the thought process you guys went through before, going with direct access on the IVO appliance, what are some of the things that influenced that decision, you think?
One of the things was obviously a recent migration to Windows 7, and we quite early on within that project decided that we were going to go down the enterprise platform of Windows 7 purely to leverage the capabilities of direct access. We were aware that direct access existed. We are a Microsoft customer. We already used forefront technologies such as TMG and UAG as a portal service for various internal staff services such as OWA, etc. So we were very aware that direct access was there. And as I say, the decision to go down the Windows 7 Enterprise route was purely from a direct access perspective to help us leverage that and save the time and the headaches for our users. And it certainly has saved a lot of headaches.
Are there a few specific things you could touch on that you've been able to get working with this appliance that you hadn't been able to previously?
Yeah, sure. So we actually, about 12 months plus ago, set up direct access ourselves, and we found there were quite a few applications that didn't work purely because they weren't IPv6 aware. So our document management system, we use FileSite, which delivered by Autonomy, which many people are probably aware of. That currently in its current state and version is not IPv6. I believe IPv6 is coming for that, but I'm not too sure when that is. I've heard it's towards the end of this year. That said, we did find that there were other applications, so not just our document management system, but certainly our digital dictation environment will only speak over IPv4, as with our time recording system, which obviously is a lawyer roaming, being able to actually post their time there and then. It saves them a lot of time from when they're back in the office if they have to retrospectively go back and do that. So there's 3 applications there that our fee earners and lawyers use on a very regular basis that allows them to do it from wherever they are, as long as they've got an internet connection.
Excellent. Anything else that you think would be valuable for folks to know? We haven't touched on.
Possibly not, actually. I mean, we've only been up and running for what, 6 to 8 weeks as a live case for this. As I say, we've gone from the VPN world, SSL VPN world, where people were having to use 2-factor authentication So they were using a token as well as their AD username and password. And as Jordan's already said, because of the certificate-based, it already is two-factor authenticated, but because it's certificates to the machine, it takes that headache away from people not remembering their PIN for their token or losing their token, etc. So, you know, that it saves there as well.
Excellent. All right. I do appreciate it, and I am going to turn it back over to Eric.
And I'm going to interject just for 1 minute, Peter. This is Jordan again, because something I didn't touch on, and Max brought it up, and just to put a little more technical detail behind those applications he was mentioning. So we talked about how the appliance and most of our installs don't require IPv6 inside the network at all, and that's fully true. The appliance translates all of that information. But one key aspect to the way that DirectAccess works, because it's all IPsec traffic, is that all traffic, all of the packets that are coming from the DirectAccess client computers, so the traffic coming from the laptops to the DirectAccess box, that's all IPv6. It's always IPv6 packets so that it can be IPsec protected. And so we recognize that as a problem, and those are the applications that Bond Pierce ran into were applications, client-side applications, that were not capable of speaking IPv6. Basically, we're not capable of generating IPv6 packets. And so those kind of applications, and we see them pretty commonly. We see applications with a lot of our installs that just don't work over DirectAccess. And so that's another value add to the appliance, and what Eric mentioned way in the beginning about how Ivo Networks is developing software to enhance the DirectAccess stack, as we call it. We've developed a client-side translator, kind of a 4 to 6, IPv4 to IPv6 translation service that can take those applications that are not capable of IPv6 and therefore are not capable of working over DirectAccess and cause them to successfully work over DirectAccess. So that's kind of the technical background on what happened and why the appliance was able to solve those applications when it wouldn't work on the existing DirectAccess install. Sorry to interrupt, but I had not talked about that, Peter.
Not a problem.
No problem. So again, we're going to head into the frequently asked questions arena of DirectAccess, and this will be a time, again, if you have questions, please post them in your panel on the right-hand side there, and we'll address them here at the end. But the first question always, and Jordan's kind of touched on this, is do I need to be IPv6 to capitalize on this technology? The simple answer is no. Our appliance will handle all of those translations, so that is not a worry for you. Is DirectAccess secure? Probably the second biggest question we get. The answer to that is yes. It encrypts all the traffic inside IPsec tunnels. Again, as you can see, there are multiple factors of authentication, including computer accounts, certificates, Caveros. Additionally, you can integrate smart cards or two-factor authentication if you still choose to do so. Again, what are the advantages of using special purpose appliances, such as our DirectAccess concentrator? First and foremost, which I mentioned at the beginning, is performance. Again, we're the only company that integrates those Nitrox chipsets onto the main board of the appliances. We do not use add-in cards. And this has resulted in great throughput, again, 2.5 gigs, of throughput on your encrypted data. Third is security. Our appliances are edge devices. We're an edge company. We've been in that business for over a decade. So all of our appliances are designed and hardened and locked down to sit on the edge of the network. And then there's the value-add features, which Jordan just briefly described as one being our translator. At TechEd this year, we announced that we will be releasing in the next quarter a DirectAccess management console that will bring a lot of advantages to the IVO solution. Again, we've already talked about our NAT 4 to 6 translator, which means if you have applications on the client side that do not speak or aren't aware of IPv6, we can get those to work for you via DirectAccess. Next question is, what about my non-Windows 7 users, my mobile phone users, Mac users, etc.? They would still have access to their corporate environment via the SSL VPN portals that can be established through UAG, which is also running on their appliances. So how long does our general implementation take? Anywhere between 3 to 5 hours is our average for a direct access implementation. Obviously, that can vary considerably depending on your environment and what you're trying to accomplish. But on average, we're 3 to 5 hours of actual work time to get deployed. Do I have to make a lot of changes to my current network? Nope. As Jordan kind of covered earlier, there's really two things that need to be done, both of which are listed here as certificate server and NLS website. That's pretty much all you have to do on the back side of your environment. Again, each case is different, but we will always work with our clients to make sure everything's getting set up correctly, and any pre-configuration that needs to be done can be sorted out in any kind of planning meeting. So with that, I want to thank everybody for your time. I still don't see any questions in there, but we are going to keep it open here briefly for people. If you could post your questions in there, we would be more than happy to address those right now. Again, my name is Eric Betterman. I'm our sales manager here at IVO Networks. My contact information is there. Peter Hammerley, one of our account representatives, is also on the line, and he is also your point of contact for UK-based interest. And again, Jordan Krause, our senior engineer, who is also a Microsoft Forefront MVP, would be more than happy to address any technical questions you have as well. So that is our information. We'll leave it open here briefly to see if any questions do come across. If not, we'll be closing in a minute or two, and I wish all of you a good day. So we will sit back and wait. Thank you. Product is licensed. All the server licenses are included with the appliances. Microsoft DirectAccess does require UAG CALs. If you have an enterprise agreement, I would suggest you look at that already as being part of it. What we find is most cases, if a company does have an enterprise agreement in place, they generally already have the UAG CALs. If not, we suggest contacting your Microsoft representative, and they can set you up with those. They're relatively inexpensive. So that's how your license, but your server license is covered, so you don't need to worry about that.
And that was actually confirmed, Eric. The new version of the Microsoft eCal that was kind of rediscussed a few months ago does for sure include the UAG user cal as well. And so if you have an enterprise agreement, you have what you need to put this into place.
Thank you. I'm going through your questions right now, and I'll address them as we go. Ballpark price of appliances. List price, they range from about $8,000 up to about $18,000. That depends on your environment, total number of users, etc. But that is our price range. So we base all of our machines on heavy user counts. So if it's a 100-user appliance, that would mean you had 100 users all logged in concurrently running somewhere between 10 to 20 applications. We believe you'll still get great performance at 100. Obviously, if they're just doing things like email, SharePoint, etc., that number goes up dramatically. So probably somewhere near the 300, 400, 500 range for a company. Our next appliance up would be our 1,000-user appliance that runs around 14,000, and that is a 1,000-user heavy concurrent appliance. which is our most popular model generally.
And then our largest appliance, largest enterprise appliance, is the one that's closer to the 18,000, and that one we tag on roughly 5,000 concurrent users. And like I said before, too, the appliances can be load balanced together. They actually come with all the componentry built in to load balance themselves, so you don't have to put any extra load balancing hardware in place or anything like that. They're ready to do it on their own. And so you can put in 2 appliances, whether it's for growth to meet a certain user count, or if it's just for redundancy to have it's full active load balancing. So if you want to have 2 of them running side by side on top of each other, so to speak, just for redundancy's sake and to split the load between the 2, that's also a common installation scenario.
Thank you, George. And we'll leave it here about another minute or so. If we don't get any more questions, we will be signing out, but we'll give you another minute or so for anyone who has any follow-up questions. All right. With that, again, if you have further questions, feel free to contact any of the people. We got one. Can this work with Windows to Go, George?
Yes, definitely. That's an interesting new use case scenario. Windows to Go is a new feature of Windows 8, where you can basically load a full Windows operating system on a USB stick and then plug it into a computer, your home computer, a kiosk, wherever you are. You plug in your corporate USB stick, boot to it, and you have a fully enclosed copy of Windows 8 running on that computer. And yes, one thing that we didn't mention in the slides is, the operating systems we talked about for DirectAccess are Windows 7, Windows 2008 R2, but Windows 8 clients definitely are also supported, approved to be DirectAccess client computers. And Windows 8 running on Windows to Go, yes, those can also be DirectAccess client computers.
I hope that answers your question. Also, like I said, we also do one-on-one demos for our clients. You feel free to contact us if that's something you're interested in. And those demos are basically designed to be a Q&A session and a brief overview with our engineering team. So we can walk you through any unique aspects of your environment or things you're trying to accomplish and see if they'll be a fit with us. If that is it, which I believe it probably is, we are going to sign out. Again, I want to thank everybody for attending today. If you have any follow-up questions, please email us. Thank you, everybody.